Hello, Billy the Artist here, and we are carrying on with The Incredibles. The last one that we did was Dash. We have also previously done Mr. Incredible, Mrs. Incredible, Elastigirl. We've also done the baby Jack Jack, and we've done Violet Parr. Now we've done these using cheap felt tips and old pencil crayons just to show you that you can have fun with just about any material. And we're doing these really quickly just to show you, even though like the full drawing for these, some of these are like between half an hour to an hour tops, whereas a lot of my how to draw videos I try to do really quickly in less than half an hour, but these with all the colour are a little bit different. But today we're doing Frozone, so we shall kick straight in. Now we've got the paper on the page and I'm going to divide it up into quarters. And again, remember, I used to do this freehand, but using a ruler kind of definitely makes sure that it's where it needs to be. So there's my page divided lightly into quarters, and we are going to use the boxes again to build everything up. So you've got the kind of top of his head is up here on the page, and the bottom of his jaw. So here you could just draw an oval for his head, but I'm going to draw boxes first. So there we've got rectangles, and if you do like and subscribe, you'll find you'll be updated on all of the new videos that I do. So here we've got a diamond shape for his hand, and there we've got a rectangle coming up for the finger. It's kind of going to go halfway up. This is a very dynamic pose. But yeah, please do like and subscribe, and you'll be kept up to date with all of my art videos that come out. And that finger is following that line of that triangle down there, and then his thumb is coming off horizontally over here, and you can see, and we can match these up. It's going to be down where his chin is, kind of down here in a moment. Now his arm, you've got his right arm coming down, and you can see that's kind of in the center of this quarter, and that helps us to just place things a little bit. Now his bottom curves round from his leg, and his right knee comes there. So again, you can put a little rectangle in there and a rectangle for his waist there, and then we want from off his shoulder, so I'll just put a D there for where his left shoulder is. And I'm using these box techniques because it gives you can put little dots down, and you can do dot to dot if you want, but the boxes, you could even do a stick man, help you to place everything. So you can see the tip of his fingers come out here. So we've got a little rectangle and a bit of a rectangle there for his left arm, and his thumb comes further out, and you can see it comes quite far over, and it comes further than his pointed finger, which is pointing into the distance in the background. And then we've got two little rectangles, which are his two fingers that are pointing down, and then we need his thigh that's coming over here, and his knee is right through that halfway line. So we've got another rectangle there. But the reason I use these boxes, and you can see it in How to Draw Anything Part 1, it just shows the absolute basics of drawing these. Now I've recently been asked in a comment how to get the proportions correct. Like I say, you've got the top of your paper, and you can see there, put that mark at first, and you can see down here that if you put a mark there, that's where the bottom of his ice surfboard is going to be. Now again, using these shapes, you can then put everything in between these 2 points using the cross in the center. So do check out not only the previous drawings, the Incredibles drawings, but check out How to Draw Anything. The link is in the cards and in the description to the video, and you can see how you can utilize this for any subject that you want. Again, I'm drawing a big oval here. Now the back of his ice surfboard is there, the front is here, and it hasn't even got a line on it, so you can draw that across, and you can even draw a cross to help you even within this shape where you're going to put the oval. And you can see the surfboard comes right over to here, and it also comes halfway over in this quarter. So you put those little points in, and that'll give you a guide for actually drawing the oval. And when you become even more confident with your drawing, you might just put these little marks down on a paper. You use the border of the paper to build your proportions. Now again, his foot here is a triangle. So I'm going to just put a triangle in there. His foot, his left foot is also a triangle, and that's further back and in line with the front triangle. Now his left leg, you can see, is straight up, whereas his right leg is diagonal going up. Now straight away you've got a very quickly drawn in, just using simple shapes, which will help you then to put all of the other proportions on, and we can build this up using these lines. Now again, it's just practice. Draw, spend long amounts of time just drawing rectangles, boxes, triangles, diamonds, ellipses. And again, check out How to Draw Anything Part 1 and you'll see how I developed my drawing over the years. So now anyway, we are going to get into building up Frozone's detail. Now his nose is directly kind of halfway inside his head, and I'm going to bring his chin. So what I need to do is, I've put his thumb halfway and it isn't, it's a bit lower. So this is how you can then work on some of your corrections, because his chin is just above halfway. So now I'm going to oval that so it's a bit lower down. But again, I'm just whacking this in really quickly, and you can do this with the drawing when you're out, if you're drawing from life. So his nose is just a nice ellipse shape. There we've got his goggles. So you've got a little rectangle there for his goggles going up to the top of his head. But they're going to curve as they come down. And you've got his blacked out visor, his lens and his goggles. They go outside of the top of his head. Now, again, his mouth is, if we put a kind of diamond shape in, you can just put another bigger egg. We can build down to his jaw, and then his mouth is just a nice little pointed ellipse inside. And then put that little dent in the top for the top of his lips. And obviously he's going to have this great moustache that he's got. And you've got, coming up the side of his head, you've got a highlight down here, and you've got his kind of chiseled jawline going up, and then another little line on the outside where he's got his very tailored kind of goatee beard. We can draw the bottom underneath of his bottom lip. Like I say, his nose is so amazingly well shaped that his kind of visor goes over the top. And again, we'll colour that in momentarily. But you can see there quite quickly how, just using those simple shapes, so you've got a little cylinder, a little ellipse, a slightly bigger ellipse for the mouth with one inside. And you've just used boxes and then just little curves to build in. And overall, his head is just this giant ellipse, this kind of stretched out egg. And that helps you to build everything up. And again, you can see here, you've got the bottom of his chin, and you come over, and we can now correct the hand, because that needs to come across, because you've got the top of that finger, and the top of his finger comes up to where his nose is. So those, I'm just going to rub those out a little bit quickly, and this is how you can correct very quickly on the fly as you go with your drawing. So now we've got his finger, using those construction lines that you put in. And this is, again, this is typical superhero pose. So look at any kind of comic with superheroes in, and you come across, this finger is pointed a little bit further out, kind of fanned his fingers are out, and you can draw the outline at the top. And then you've got how your fingers split into three. So you've got the front part, the middle part with a curve in, and then where it joins on the hand. And you've got a little top of the hand that you can see because his fingers are so splayed. Now this isn't perfectly horizontal on the first little joint from where it joins the hand up to the first kind of knuckle bend, little joint in the finger, and then it's horizontal as it goes out. So there's the first part, second part, third part. Now finally you've got the fourth part. You come from the top of his hand there, and that comes straight out, and it's in line with this finger, and you can just simply indicate all of that in place. Now the bottom of his hand comes right down underneath, and you've got that diamond shape, and then you've got another curve inside for his thumb, and then his thumb comes out to the middle of his chin. So if you draw an ellipse and an egg shape, you've got the actual bend in his thumb as well. And we can join that up, and that gets you Frozone's hand looking out. This is foreshortening towards you. Now from the top of his arm going up over his shoulder and his back, that's halfway where his mouth is. So you can just nice and simply indicate his back going down. Now his arm down to his elbow. He's got very slender gloves, hasn't he, and forearm. That's nice and simple. You've got the two lines coming down and then a curve underneath, and you've got his top of his arm going up to where his thumb is, and you've got the shadow that's indicated, but you've got the top of his shoulder going up, and that's like his white of his uniform going up over the top of his shoulder, and you've got the shadow inside caused by his head. Now coming off from this side, you've got his chest coming down right the way to behind this elbow joint, and it's inside that diagonal rectangle that you put in at the beginning. And we can join that off there, and again just a D shape, the outside of a D. If you think you've got the back there of a capital D, and then again the same thing for this shoulder, and it joins on. The elbow comes down very slightly, and then you get his gauntlet going around the outside, and that elbow just joins underneath. Now coming up to this hand, the top of the gauntlet curves down to the top of his hand, and then it goes out to the very top, and then these two fingers are just together, the first two fingers, and slightly curved, and then you've got the thumb. So again, imagine just an egg shape. Draw the outside of that egg, and then join up to where that joins the first finger pointing out. Now you've got these two fingers that are pointing down right from the edge of the hand. So come out and connect those, and then the gauntlet, you can bring that up right to the thin part of his wrist where it joins where the thumb points out. And then you just got these two little sausages pointing down for the two fingers for his hand. And then you've got Frozone really starting to stand out. Now we come from his back all the way down to the back of his knee. This is just like a very, very, like the bottom part of a big capital C. So if you go from the top of his arm all the way down, you've got this kind of capital C. But just notice how it isn't a perfect curve. It comes down, you've got inside the construction lines, bit straight to there, and then it curves, and you've got this little marker here halfway, and then the curve changes again as it comes down his leg and joins under the back of his knee. Now you've got the top of his knee, and that is going to go, and you can see it's kind of just 2/3 over on his arm, and you can bring his thigh up and over and join the top of his knee. Now here on his right leg you've got the same kind of thing, but we're going to bring it down following that curve, the shape of his body down to match, and then it joins the top of his thigh, where his hip is, like where his kind of waistline to the top of his thigh, and then the top of his leg comes down and the curve of his knee. Now if you can see there that the line comes out from just at the top of his knee to the back of his left leg, of his right knee in the foreground. So we're going to just pull that across, and then we want to bring his knees down. And you see the entire body is starting to come together in this gigantic kind of powerful superhero pose, and he'd have the huge ice flow. And you can actually increase that in, even though we haven't got it in the reference photo, you could actually put Frozone's ice flow that he kind of skates on. You could do a curve going back, but we'll possibly add that in a moment. But anyway, we now need to build his leg down. So the front of his boot, because of the pressure, is right up to his leg. And we just want that going all the way down to his foot. And then you've got the back of his calf coming down to his ankle, going down to the boot where you've got this little triangle here. Again, just follow your lines and just use the shapes that you've already got placed to give you the position of all of the elements of his body on the page. So now we've got a very tight knee, and the calf starts to pull out on the front leg. And this one's more in the foreground, and you've got the top of the boot here, and that's going to follow the curve of the outside of his leg, of the front of his shin at the top. Now we're going to follow the line down all the way to match the line of his leg going down to his foot. Now we pull out from the back of his boot, just slightly outside the calf, and we're going to follow that down to where the ankle is. And his ankle comes just to the right side of your centre line if you put that in. Again, just figure this out and put your little place markers, and it'll help you when you're actually doing your drawing. Now again, you've got a straight line down where the boot is on the side of the foot, and then the toes, it comes to where the point is. And you can just go up a little bit and then connect those. Now he's got a little bit of patterning in his boot, and he's got another line there that flows over. So just imagine you're following the curve around from the ankle over the top, and we'll, even though this is in deep shadow, we will do the same thing on this side. And there is a pencil outline of Frozone. So now we're going to put in the ink outline, which would be how before digital, BC, before cyberspace, somebody would do the pencils, and then for a comic book, and then somebody would do all of the inking. So I'm starting with his visor, and I'm following the curve, and that goes all the way to the edge. And then somebody else would actually colour in. It was very rare that one artist would do, in American comics, all of the work. In British comics, an artist would pretty much do all of it. They'd do the drawing and the inking in. And it was just black and white, way back in the 1980s, with a little bit of colour. And as printing technology changed, more and more added. But in British comics, we ended up with colour, and the artist did the whole lot. So here are Frozone's lips, showing his teeth inside. Now we want this curve coming down to where his jaw line is a little bit, and then it's a little kink as it comes down to his chin. And it's more of a kind of rounded square at the bottom, because he's got his kind of chiseled chin. And then he's got his little goatee beard that comes up. And I'm going to fill that in quickly. And then we've got coming all the way down. And then you've got the side of his head that just joins. And all of this is in incredible shadow, so we can intensify and build that up in a moment. Now we need to put his rather cool moustache in. Now we'll start and we'll go out over onto his right, on the right hand side of the page for his left arm. So you got the shoulder comes down, and you got from where his chest is, and we'll just draw, remember, use the curve of your hand as that comes down and around. Left elbow going inside the gauntlet, nice curve, like a big, just the front of a big B. Imagine a B. Just keep thinking of letters and the way you form letters, and it helps you for some of the smaller bits. I'm just following that line over to the fingers, around his thumb on his left hand, the underneath of his hand, and then the two fingers in the background, and then just join the gauntlet up. You see how the line really develops and grows. There's his back. We need the line for his suit, and here we've got his thumb coming out and the hand going up to that finger. And I'm just going in and doing the lines inside the finger as I go. You could go all the way down and then put the lines in after. Doesn't matter which way you do it. You can just do it either way as you ink in. So on this finger there's barely any of these kind of fold lines of the underneath of the fingers, which is absolutely fine. So you can do that way. And you get the hand coming down, around, up, going out to the thumb that's pointing towards you, and you've got those incredible crease lines inside of his glove. So we just indicate those. Now for his right arm going down to his elbow, and then you want that going up for his arm, going to where his shoulder is. Again, we'll follow the line down his back, all the way to the back of his right knee, the right thigh, the knee, going right the way down to the boot. Now I'm just going to pronounce that curve a little bit more, going over to the knee and then going down to the front of his thigh, around the boot, all the way down to the ankle, and then around the heel, go to the point of his toes, and then up. And there you've got his left leg done in the background. Now we want to do his front right leg onto his surfboard. Do the curve of the top of the boot, down to the ankle, right the way down to the heel, and then you can go a little bit more up on the front of where his toes are, and then we can just add that little detail line. Now finally we can do the big ellipse. Now I've just used that because you've got the lines, the construction lines in the background. I've not rested my arm completely on. Remember, use the pivot from your shoulder and you can go all the way round very, very simply and very easily. Now I've got some of the construction lines. I'm going to go back in with a pencil because you've got down the centre line on his Frozone surfboard, you can see through the centre of his foot, you've got this straight line which is the direction that it goes, and then from the centre, so if you put a little dot right in the middle, you've got like these lines of a clock going out. So you've got a line that comes out there, and that's kind of mirrored, and then it flicks and curves up, and then you've got 4 points. So you can imagine 1, 2, 3, 4, and these are going to be mirrored right the way over onto the other side. So you can put another one in. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, and they're going to join up. And this is for when you're colouring in your details. So this is going to come all the way through. So imagine that line comes all the way through and then comes out and joins up to there. Again, this one comes down, goes through the centre, comes out and joins on the opposite side. And that's how you can add your details very, very quickly using just simple points and places of reference. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4. Again, on this side you're going to have 1, 2 that you can see. The third one is missing and the fourth one is kind of behind there. So that is going to join up to that. These are direct opposites. That's going to go and join up to that one. That's going to go behind that leg, and this final one is going to go up right behind that foot. And that's how you can fill in the details very quickly. Now we're going to start with the colour. Right, now I'm just going, because it's such light colours, I'm just going to rub out the pencil construction lines from the inside as much as I possibly can. Remember, especially when I showed you on the Incredibles, when we got the yellow, it would pick up either the pencil or not just the pencil, but it could pick up the ink line if you're not using I'm just using this little fine liner and it doesn't say that it's permanent. So the yellow from your felt tips and maybe even some pencil crayons or even paints if you're using like a little watercolour set that you may have. And so I'm just rubbing this out just to give me as clean a run as possible. Now I'm leaving as much as I can these pencil lines in for the shapes on the disc. Again, remember how I said you could just draw a big curve going round like that, and that could be Frozone's kind of ice trail that he rides along. He shoots out his ice, and we'll just detail that up. Just put a quick outline on. Nice and easy. A bit like, a roller coaster, because he is this kind of superhero, isn't he? So you can add this, and this is what you can do with drawing. It's your imagination that will allow you to come up with your different drawings that you want to, and you can take something that you see as an inspiration and then you can use that and develop it and come up with your own creativity. And that's how creative artists work. They utilise their imagination to come up with something like The Incredibles. They have an idea and then they'll put down the drawing. Now, I'm using cheap felt tips that you can get from any kind of supermarket or thrift store, that kind of thing. When you go out and you see a pound shop or a dollar store, or you go to Asda or Walmart, wherever you may be, there'll be cheap felt tips, and I'm using these. Now they're quite zingy and dark, but I'm using these and then building up with pencil crayons after. So I've got this kind of green and I'm filling it in really quickly, just close of a zingy green that I can actually get to Frozone. And then I'm going to use the pencil crayons, and these pencil crayons that I'm using, they're actually water soluble, which means you can get a brush and then apply water over the top and they'll like kind of turn into watercolours. So you can actually put some pencil crayon down and then effectively create a wash of colour and spread it around a bit. But I'm not doing that, I'm just using them as pencil crayons. But they're over 20 odd years old. So you could just fill in these outlines with block colours, whether it's pencil crayons, felt tip pens. But as you'll see on this one, the blue is actually quite dark. Now again, there is this shadow down here, but we need this, even though this looks like a very light blue, it's actually very, very dark. And it's kind of too dark for what I'm after. And so I'm just indicating, because I'll build up on top afterwards using the pencil crayons. Now I've also got this grey. Now remember, use just a little bit of paper and you can see then if it's going to work. So this grey now, I'm filling in the shadow down the side of his boot. It's actually quite a greeny grey, which is quite nice. And actually with Frozone, if I kind of miss the line off, I'm just going slightly outside of the line, going under, and you've got the base underneath of his ice surfboard, and that'll be filled in with black. But again, this grey is actually quite nice, and this is giving us a nice basis that I can then work over with the pencil crayons. And we can indicate halfway across here, going right up to his thigh, where the shadow line is, inside his glove. Again, there's not so much. We've got underneath his hand here, and the fingers in the background that are in shadow, and then a little bit underneath there. We've got the deeper shadow on this side of his head. Now this hand is completely in shadow, but what I'm going to do is from his chin you can see how all of that shadow comes out, but we've got this lovely blue highlight in the background. Now here we've got, and I've missed a little bit, but we can rectify that. So what we need is a little bit of green coming out there. Put the black line on, just let that dry a little bit before I go over it, because felt tip pens can then rip up your paper. And we've got in the centre coming down, so leave the white either side, and then we've got his thumb. You've got a white highlight right on the side, all the way down his finger, so you've got a white highlight down that side. This finger's causing a little bit of shadow on the top, and then you want the shadow underneath, leave the white on the top, and then on this finger underneath is just in shadow, the top's highlighted, but that finger is causing a bit of shadow over the little finger, and then right down to the tip at the end. And I'm going to fill all of this in, and we can darken it down in a moment with a pencil crayon. Now here we've got the shadow coming down all the way under, following down his right hand side and his right hand leg, all the way down to join the top of the boot. You can see how straight away we're getting this form developing on Frozone. Now even though I've put the icing in the background, we'll do that kind of last, and you want that lighter going off, and if you don't put the dark line on, that will actually go into the distance even more. But you see how it's thick here, and you make it thinner as it goes. That makes it, just making it thin makes it look as if it's going off into the distance. So now we've just blocked in those areas quite quickly, and I've now got this kind of chestnutty colour, but I'm first going to fill in. Oh, here we go. Yep, those are the two I want. You need to leave a white highlight there on his nose. Now I'm using this lighter brown first and filling everything in on his face. And then I'm going to use this more chestnutty brown. Go right to the edge. And then underneath here, just leaving that lighter colour, little strip down that edge. And then this side's going to go really dark. And then I've got this kind of reddy purple. Now I'm going to check on here. Yep, that kind of works and darkens down. Again, just check your felt tips on that spare piece of paper, because the wrong colour can just ruin your drawing. So we need there the little bit of his kind of laughter line going down the side from his nose to his mouth. We've got underneath that lip, and then we need the shadow underneath his bottom lip, going all the way down to his goatee. So there you can see how just using 3 little felt tips, building the layers up before we get into the pencil crayons, we can actually develop Frozone's head. Now again, this grey is a little bit too much. As I've said to you before, if we tried to fill in this side here, it's probably a little bit too dark. And we've got a bit of a shadow line going up there, but it's easier to add dark than it is to take it away. So we can now move to using the pencil crayons. Now I'm going to use this grey at first, and this will give you a bit of the form. So we've got going over the top of his hand, and just like you're using a pencil in any of the how to draw pencil videos, the darker you press on, the darker the grey you're going to get. The lighter you press on, you can give the 3-dimensional form as you increase the tone. Again, I've done it very soft and then increased it just as you get to the top. So now I've done on his thumb, going up to the top of the back of his hand. Now coming down his chest, you've got more of a shadow here, but it's all kind of light. So I'm going to fill all of that in the same, and then underneath here, coming down to his chest, going over the grey that I've put on, and you just increase it and feather it slightly. And that's the way that light caresses around our kind of form, because we've not got solid edges in a human body. You can then create the soft shapes and the way that light actually falls. So he's got more of an intense shadow coming down there, so you can see how straight away his chest is starting to look more 3-dimensional. So if we do the same with his visor and his helmet, so again you've got a little bit of light. Now he's got other colours reflected in here. I'm doing all the same colour across, and then I'm going to increase it where the shadow is going up to the top of his head. And then a little bit on this side going up, and then we've got this lovely blue highlight. Now coming right across his visor, from where that dark is, shadow on that side, curving right the way around. Now it's got a kind of slight purple tinge, so there's kind of reflected colours in that. So I'm going to put some in the top of his hand there, and just a little bit in the back of that thumb, and just putting these little reflected colours in gives your art and image a little bit more vibrancy. Just put a little bit of purple in the top there. Now I'm going to use this kind of ivory colour and put a little bit, it's just a little bit of light, but be careful, this is yellow and we're using a lot of blue and green tones on this actual image. You've got like yellow, nice yellow highlights coming down the centre of his glove, and it just helps it to just start to leap off quite a lot. So it's also got a little bit of beige, but we'll come back, we'll do the rest of his grey bits of his suit. So I'm using this kind of mid-tone grey to fill all of that in. Nice and quick and nice and simple. We've got much darker shadows that are going to go on the top in a bit that will give it the fuller, more three-dimensional shape as we increase that. But again, this is something, as I've shown you in the previous videos, by running the pencil crayon over the top of the felt tip, you get this much denser, fuller actual colour. So here in his hand I've got the grey going in and then filling up all of his thumb. Remember, leave this kind of white bit just on the edge, and I'm filling all the way up the finger, and then soften it like you did on the chest, right up to the edge, again all down that side. Now his fingers going up to the top like you did on this glove on this side, just putting a little grey right to the edge of the line. And that gives you a little bit more of three-dimensionality to it. I'm using this much lighter grey for the inside of his hand, the kind of pads where there's a bit more of a highlight, again on the end of the thumb there, and then down his chest, down the front of his boot, and then down this finger. Now coming up to the top of his head, so what we need now is this rather fantastic zingy green. Now I'm using this kind of lighter one to fill in the front before we fill in the shadow areas. I'm just going to fill in over all of the green again, just like I did. On the grey. It's this kind of very nice minty light bluey green, ever so slight. And that's a pencil that I have never used. So in over 25 years, this is the first time that this particular colour has ever been used from this pencil crayon set. And I think that's the only one. So that's actually had some use for the first time ever out of that set. So there you can see the colours starting to really fill up and look quite nice. And that's something using the pencil crayons over the actual felt tips you can do quite quickly. Now, he's got this shadow coming down off here. So I'm using this blue to increase, and you can see on his leg here, he's also got a bit of shadow, and it's this blue colour. And then the same underneath. And just the edges, you can indicate that shadow. Now there's no real darker green of this in my set, so what you need to do is, because it is actually a bluey colour, is use some lighter blues, and that allows you to then blend a little bit to give you, with the darker blues, the actual darker greeny colour that you're after with the shadow and the shade. So now we've got the top of that arm coming. In fact, that needs to be lightened up. So I'm really pressing on tough there to get the light before I put the shade in. So coming all the way down on this, like I did on the Incredibles family with their red, in the shade I'm putting the blue all the way over, and again it just fills in rather than just putting flat black on. I'm going over that little bit of blue felt tip that I put in as well. Rather than just putting flat black on, it then gives you a deeper, richer shadow, because there is no actual black when you're out looking around. Shadows aren't black, they're actually colours, and they'll be reflected colours. So if there's a brick building, it'll be a kind of brown, reddy brown possible shadow. If there's billboards with greens or blues on, actually look at the shadows and see you've got different tinges of colour. So now I'm putting this blue on to intensify the shadow on the side of his head before I put the darker brown on. Again, underneath his top lip and his bottom lip, just giving it shape and three-dimensionality. Doing the nose, a little bit on his goggles, and then again on that shadow going up the top of his head. And you can see now straight away Frozone's really starting to gather some form and shape. Now we've got blue all the way down. I'm not pressing on too hard, a kind of medium pressure there, because you've got this like highlighted blue in his actual boot just down the back, but it's in the left foot there's not so much. That's just going to be predominantly much using the darker black, but you've got a much stronger blue and like a reflected highlight in the front of that. So now before, oh, missed a bit on the hands, can't be doing that. Here we go, let's put the blue in there and the dark lines underneath to indicate all of that. And again, you've got this light of his pad, leave that grey showing. I've put the blue on where the darker shadow is going to go in a moment. We need to increase the blue underneath there. And again, you've got this darker shadow caused by his chest coming right the way across his body. So even that, just using the blues before we've even got anywhere near a black, is giving you a much fuller form. Again, going off to the top of his leg, we need to bring the blue over. And now what I'm going to do for this tone, I'm using, this isn't black, this is a very dark earthy brown, kind of raw umber in my oil paints. Do check out my painting and drawing time-lapse page, and that will show you my oil paintings from start to finish, and they can take up to a month, 3 to 4 weeks of full-time painting to actually get those images done. So I'm now using that brown going all the way up the same way as I did with the blue, and it helps intensify, and it just gives you a richer colour experience. And this is something that I do with my oil paintings. I always mix in colours, reflected colours. So if I know that there's a bush off the side, or certain colours that are around, I'll actually put them in, and it just helps to intensify and increase the vibrancy of the art. And if you go to a gallery and actually look around, you'll see this as well in old master paintings. Now I'm filling in. You've got a little bit of light on his teeth, but we need the darker grey as well before I put that brown back in. So now I want the shadow underneath from his visor coming down on the side of his head. You can see Frozone's face is completely starting to look like it does in the reference image, and that's just fantastic. But what we want is a more nutty brown as well before we put the final dark on. And we can do the same thing, so we can leave the highlight, just do it soft to get your gradation coming to the highlight on his nose. And then I want a little bit of that reddy brown in that cheek. Frozone's looking pretty groovy. And we're nearly there. And again, you can, even in the shadow down here, this nutty brown, rather than just putting the black on, I'm just indicating some lines all the way down here, because there's something over here from this side that's directing towards his leg, and you can just pretend and indicate some colour, and it just adds quality to your work. As I was saying, go and check out old master paintings and drawings and see what they've done and how they've used these reflected lights. I'm going to put the brown down inside that blue shadow. I mean, just even that, Frozone is looking pretty good and groovy. So now I'm going to use that lighter green again, go over and just feather and smooth a whole lot in. But now you can see he's got this kind of strange doubled up line, so I'm just using the blue to create that over the front of both of his legs, coming down to the top of his boots. So now, before we carry on filling in Frozone, because we've got a lot down, we're going to do these little quick background elements. So again, I'm using this lighter grey, and what you want is, I'm filling pretty much all of it in, but lightly going into the background. And then as I come up to the front, I'm just doing the edges. And think that the light is coming down. Again, the highlights are coming from this direction. So you want the edge of the ice. Just put a little bit of grey in. And then you can have it a little bit darker underneath where the shadow is. And then as it kind of curves, you can just intensify, and that gives it, again, you're following the shape to show where Frozone's actually come from. And I'm just using that grey at the moment, but it's ice and it's water, so you can always put a little bit of blue in, especially at the bits at the front, and then lighten it as you go further back. And the lighter that it is, it'll recede and go further into the distance. So the more intense your blue here, you can see how that is sticking out and standing to the foreground and coming out more. Again, same thing on this side, just a little bit of hint of blue all the way down the edge. And that's how you can do the ice that he's actually flying on. So again, I'm now going to just intensify the grey a little bit. Again, his ice surfboard that he's actually flying on. You've got all of these shapes all the way around. I'm just going to put a pencil line in. At the back, you've got a bit of a lip, like you have here going underneath. And so he's got a little bit of shape, and you can just fill in these little triangles going all the way using your colours. So again, you've got a lighter grey at the back. Just think this is like a little shallow dish or a saucer, and so that's lighter here, but then it becomes darker as it comes to the front. So I'm filling all of the shape in, and it's darker here because obviously you've got the light coming out, you've got the highlight on the front of his boots, and this is the shadow that he's actually casting, that Frozone's casting onto his little disc that he's flying on. So I've put that all the way in. Again, just reflecting some blue in first, all the way over. And a little bit of purple before I put the slightly darker colours in. So at the back here, you want this little bit of blue coming round. Just put a little bit of purple in. Again, if you use this green, you can just kind of think, well, okay, the light's hitting him, we can just put a tiny little bit of reflected green in. Now you probably can't even notice this going down because it's so slight, but you can hear the pencil crayon on the actual paper. So you know that there's some colour, even if it's only a trace going down. And again, that will work in your favour, producing a slightly warmer drawing. Now, I'm going to use the darker grey. And here we have his shadow coming out from his boot onto his disc. And so at the back, we've got that little shape, and then you've got the central line coming all the way down and through. And so just lightly cross hatch and you can fill that one in. It's a bit darker going out that way. And then again on this side we've got all of his shadow going right to the edge of his disc. Now what we need is these triangles just shading in, and do each one at a time and go a little bit lighter in each one, and that's how you can create the form. Now we've got the lip there, and you're just creating the shape as it goes in. So I'm now going to increase that one a little bit just to make it a little bit darker, and the same on these as you come out and you come around the disc behind where his shadow is. Just nice and light all the way through. So there you've got his disc just coloured in quite nice and quickly, and the ice flow going behind the back of Frozone. Now we're getting close to actually finishing it. And he has got his super suit on. Remember in the first Incredibles film, where he's like, "Honey, where's my super suit? The city's in danger." And she says, "My evening is in danger." That is one of the best lines going. I saw somebody actually tweet about the new film. If we don't meet Mrs. Frozone in the new one, they will be sorely disappointed. And you think, what a great line in the last film. That was just brilliant at the end. So now I'm using this felt tip pen to put the shadow in right underneath, because it is very dark on here, but that is completely flat. It's given a lot of depth, but it is completely flat. So because it's blue and green, what I'm going to do is I'm going to show a little bit of blue underneath there and bring it all the way around, and it just gives a little bit of shape. Just makes it that little bit different rather than just the straight flat colour. Now we're getting close. I'm just going to use this white pencil crayon and feather out his nose so that it's not too bright. And we can do the same, put a highlight down the side of his face and going over Frozone's top lip and the top of his cheek going up there. Now I want the light blue. I haven't put these on yet, so he's got this blue reflected highlight all down this left hand side. So you've got inside the side of his cheek and on his chin and a little bit on the side of his nose, and then all at the back, going down. We've got this lovely blue highlight. Oh, missed a bit of dark off there. Fortunately, I'll be going in with that with the actual black line on the top of his hand, and then down the back of this boot and the back of his right boot, all the way down. And then inside this triangle we've got that reflected blue highlight, and we need it on the back of his calf, just going up to his knee, but it doesn't come all the way down. So you've got it down his back, down here, just down around the curve of Frozone's bottom. You've got that reflected highlight. Now finally we are going to use the black pencil crayon, and this should, and I'm going to start with his left boot. So you go right to the tip of his toe, and you've got inside his heel, just working over and with the colour, and you can go up to the edge of that blue highlight that you put on, and then you want another line inside. So you've got two lines, that's like a big V there, and then you can just soften it to the edge, fill in that colour over the top, and there you can see his legs really gone into the background. It's given so much form and shape. Now again, you've got two lines, two shadow lines going up. And here we've got where his leg is, right inside. And then where his thigh, the underneath of his thigh comes out, you want to leave a little bit of colour at the edge. And then you want that form follow the curve going up down to his knee, and then fill in the colour. And you're actually allowing all the colours underneath to show through, rather than just using black. You're using the colours underneath as well. And you want that shadow there on the top of his thigh feathering out. Again, the same on this thigh now. I'm going to feather that down all the way to his knee, edge of the knee down to the boot, showing that blue highlight. And then we can increase lightly the tone of that secondary kind of shadow line, and then feather the edge out there up to the top of the knee. Now again, underneath his chest, and then we'll do this kind of C down over the side of his body, we've got a couple of shadow lines, so do those really dark underneath. Really press on round the side of his arm up to that blue highlight, and then the same coming down to the knee, going up to the hip joint. Got a couple really dark lines, and you can just see those two dark lines going over the top of the colour. But then if you just, press on a little more gently and smooth and fill that in as if you were doing grade with a pencil, just a pencil. If you check out How to Draw Anything Part 2 shading, I show you the basics of shading with a pencil, and you just learn the touch and the feel with your hand as you draw more and get more and more technique and more skill. So now I'm feathering over that blue and filling in that leg all the way to make that blue highlight very soft right to the edge. Now we need to just increase the top of that thigh, so you've got that strong highlight over the top, and we can just put a little bit coming down over his tummy, off his chest, chest going up to under the arm. Under the arm is a darker shadow. Then we've got under this left arm to the gauntlet. I'm just indicating a little bit more darker underneath them, and that just gives them a little bit more crispness. And I'm now going to just draw over the top of that with that lighter green again, just fading into the gauntlet. And then we've got his chest coming up to his arm. We can intensify it, but just soften that out as it comes around his bicep. That Frozone's really looking like a superhero character. Now we can go and do his right shoulder going up to his head. And again, we've got closer to this side, we've got darker, but you've still got a directional shadow line following the shape of his arm and shoulder right the way up to his neck, and then fill that in. And here, if we fill in that colour just gently, rather than it just being flat black, you've got that lovely blue colour inside as well. So now we can do round the edge of his nose, underneath his visor. Just give a little bit more shape and form to his nose. Same with his top lip. And then underneath his chin, or on his chin, underneath his bottom lip. and going down to that brilliant goatee. There, Frozone's really looking good. Now all we've got is his front right boot. So if we bring that down, we want that darker grey line, or the shadow line. We're doing two, so you've got a V kind of coming down there, going right onto the front with a third one coming up, and you can intensify that right up to the top of the boot. Remember, just leave this little blue slither showing, and then gently fill in and feather, so as you've got that nice shape going around. What I didn't do is on this side, the grey going down, giving that form, finishing off, so you just got the nice white highlight going right down the front. You want the top of his boot there, going down back to the black. Going right down to the front of his toe. Now this is so intense, just like this back one, you've got the shadow where his foot touches the bottom. The bottom of his boot touches these actual ice hoverboard. And then you want that black line going up, following the shape of those lines, and you can intensify the blue a little bit, going to his heel. And that's his boot darkened down. Again, just soften that out to the edge. That's Frozone looking pretty groovy. And now we're getting to the final point. Again, you can really press on. This is your actual foreground. His hand is really leaping out. Now the white highlights down the side and the dark intensity of your shadows are going to make this stand out. That's why I've left this till the very end. So I'm just leaving that little highlight showing. We can intense the shadow on the top caused by this finger. Second finger we want underneath, coloured in, that's then casting. I need to fill that shadow area in there, over to the top of just slightly his third finger, and then again the folds of the skin going all the way down, and that's then carrying a shadow over the top onto his little finger, right to the edge, dark intense shadow, and then underneath his hand coming to his thumb. So we've got the shape of his thumb coming off. Right underneath his thumb you want that dark, intense colour. But by putting the blues and the greys and the greens down first, as I've said so many times before, just gives it that little extra vibrancy. There you can see his hands really starting to lift off. And you need to fill the shadow in, coming down all the way underneath his right arm down to his elbow, but just darken the hand and finish the hand off underneath, and then draw a darker sharp line around the edge. And there his arm is standing out completely. Now finally, all I'm going to do, if I don't knock the drawing, is on his body I'm just going over the green with this white pencil, just indicating some highlights. I'm just using this white pencil crayon just to pick up the tops of his shoulders and the light. Again, that's just to give you form, and you can do as much or as little as you want. And that's the absolute beauty of doing these kind of drawings. You can decide when you want to stop. Now I'm just going to intensify that shadow on that visor, just as you look, just to make it stand out that little bit more. But there is Frozone. I hope you've enjoyed that. I really have. That's good fun, doing that great character from The Incredibles. I really do hope you've enjoyed drawing that. Do check out all my other how to draw videos, other Incredibles ones. Do like and subscribe for future videos and art and painting time lapses. But do get your pencils out and your crayons and your felt tips and just have fun with your art and just develop your skills and have fun with your drawing through next week. Anyway, all I can say is thank you for watching. Please do like and subscribe, and I look forward to doing some drawings for you again in the future. Have fun with your own drawing too. Ta-da.